Indigenous truth and reconciliation is often misunderstood and misconstrued. It's a complex issue, one that's been used to marginalize First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. In this video, I'm going to be breaking down why it's so important for us to understand the real implications of this sensitive topic. Before this episode starts, I have a small favor to ask from you. 89% of people who watch this channel don't subscribe. So if you've ever liked any of the videos we've posted, if you like this channel, can you please do me a quick favor and hit that subscribe button? It helps the channel more than you know, and the bigger the channel gets, the better we can together make an impact towards Indigenous truth and reconciliation. Thank you and enjoy this episode. Hi there, I'm Mallory and welcome back to the channel. I'm here today to talk about Indigenous truth and reconciliation and why so many people struggle with understanding what truth and reconciliation really means. Honestly, this isn't just a non-Indigenous issue. Your background or ethnicity does not indicate whether this is going to be clear or not. I know plenty of Indigenous people who don't understand truth and reconciliation themselves. For far too long, Indigenous people have been subject to cruelty, oppression, and disregard, sometimes without even realizing it because they've become so accustomed to that treatment. It's become normal. I'm going to be sharing the 5 biggest reasons why Indigenous truth and reconciliation is often misunderstood. The first reason why Indigenous truth and reconciliation is often misunderstood is because there's a lack of awareness and understanding of Indigenous history. When people are clueless about history of Indigenous people in Canada, truth and reconciliation is just going to be a catch-all term thrown around a lot, and after a while it's probably going to get annoying if you don't understand the why behind it, right? Maybe you're not annoyed by it, but it is really important to understand that history in order to be able to take meaningful action towards advancing reconciliation, towards understanding even the truth, right? So it's really important to understand the truth, understand the history, and there's lots of sources and ways to do that. So if it's something that you are looking to learn more about the history, you can watch this video right here to get a quick and snappy understanding of what Indigenous history is between First Nations people, Métis, and Inuit, and the government of Canada and the colonization that occurred. The second reason why Indigenous truth and reconciliation is often misunderstood is there is an oversimplification of the impacts of colonialism, displacement, and genocide on generations of Indigenous people. What are the impacts of colonialism, displacement, and genocide on generations of Indigenous people? It's different for everyone. The transformation of North America and the overall impact it's had on people and communities has impacted not just the obvious things like land, environment, and society, but it's also impacted our entire nervous systems and psychological systems as human beings as well. Indigenous ways of knowing from around the world have a common understanding of interconnectivity of land, people, animals, and all life on Mother Earth. Now, that's just overall development, but colonization of North America, the Indian Act and residential schools have its own set of impacts and displacing Indigenous people and genocide, right? Everyone who's been impacted by Indian residential schools, either directly through their family or community members, have their own experiences. People who didn't go to Indian day schools or residential schools could not possibly imagine what it was like to be there. I obviously didn't go, so I couldn't imagine. But what generational trauma is when the trauma is so bad that it affects you and how you can parent your children and your children's children is a continuous cycle. Have you seen this before? Let me know in the comments below. Now, the third reason why Indigenous truth and reconciliation is often misunderstood is the nature of truth and reconciliation and how the term itself is presented. The word reconciliation really gets people excited about truth and reconciliation because there's an and in between the two words, and it implies no order, right? It should really say truth and reconciliation or not if both parties don't want to. When you think of the order of truth and reconciliation and the way that that terminology is presented, one thing that I can think about is by learning about the truth, are you engaging in reconciliation at all? That is a question for another day. However, if you are engaging in activities that are considered acts of reconciliation, then there are still going to be periods of your reconciliation reconciliation journey and of your learning journey where you're going to have moments of reflecting back on that truth. So when you think about it that way, truth and reconciliation, having the and in between them makes more sense. The fourth reason why Indigenous truth and reconciliation is often misunderstood is it gets overshadowed by recent contributions that are made by Indigenous people in promoting our own rights and culture. Indigenous people have been on a journey of empowerment, healing, resilience, and reclaiming our culture and land and rights. If you watch this video on the Indigenous Revolution, it shines a lot of light on why there has been so much activity and movement and attention drawn towards Indigenous identity, Indigenous pride, and things like that. So if this is something that you have maybe an annoyance of or something that you quite haven't come to terms with, why there's such a strong presence towards Indigenous culture, Indigenous identity, and truth and reconciliation, I highly recommend you check out that video right there. Indigenous people's rights have been fought over for decades. These rights that were written in many treaties between the Government of Canada and First Nations people who are members of various treaty territories. When you don't understand the history of treaties that were a contract and agreement between Canada and First Nations right holders since settler arrival, and if you're just looking at the rights that are in place today, it can make you think that Indigenous people get special treatment. Sometimes misunderstanding the history of treaties and how the rights that are in place today that maybe weren't in place a few years ago can help people to understand why those exist and not have negative feelings towards those rights. The fifth reason why Indigenous truth and reconciliation is often misunderstood is it gets denial that racism still exists in modern Canada against Indigenous people. There is a huge trend of cancel culture. Because cancel culture is so prevalent, systemic racism is alive and well. Cancel culture is the movement towards canceling everything that offends a group of people. And the people that are tied to those celebrations that are being canceled are getting annoyed, and there's an entire movement and hatred towards the cancel culture that is taking over a lot of not just North America, but other parts of the world as well. Systemic racism is alive and well. I have other videos coming up after this one where you can understand signs of spotting systemic racism for yourself as an Indigenous person, or how to identify someone being subjected to systemic racism if you are trying to be a really good ally and support Indigenous people in your life. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you have an incredible day. Please leave me a comment below with what your thoughts are on these reasons for truth and reconciliation sometimes being misunderstood, if any of them were really helpful for you, or what your takeaways were. I love your comments. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.